Hey, Nicole, thank you for coming in. You've
You.
got a really tremendous background,
Oh, thank you.
especially. Oh, I see. Two backgrounds. Your background in the interview, but you got a tremendous sort of career background, and I would call it servant leadership, but I think Stephen Shire would say servant leadership background as well.
Yes,
Just
that's how we
remarkable.
met. We were introduced through Stephen Shy, I believe.
Yeah, it
And
was through Stephen that we
mm,
got to do this interview, right? Because he did the
yes,
introduction. So thank you to
exactly.
Steve. But thank you to you for coming in and sharing all your expertise and your kind of wisdom. And you, as I mentioned, you've done so much over the years, so including very impactful in your work. And of course, the trends are maybe going the other way right now. But so I appreciate you know, sharing all of your insights with us. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I was really looking forward to catching up with you. So I appreciate the time today.
So, you know, what were the inflection points in your life? And it could have been, you know, when you were 3 or 5 years old. It could have been when you're older. It could have been from family members outside the family. Could have been a mentor in school. Could have been friends you've had or continue to have. It could be career moves you made. You know, if you really search through your career and your personal life, what were the three sort of magic moments that said, this is what made me who I am and really inspires me to continue in what I do?
Sure. That's a it's a great question. Probably like most people, I'd just start with my parents. I didn't really, maybe sadly it's more traditional today, but my upbringing wasn't super traditional in the time. I was raised by a single mom, but had an extremely close relationship with my father at the same time. And so while I had the influences certainly of being raised by a very hardworking mom, she was a nurse. She brought my brother and I up living hours away from where my dad was. My dad himself was very entrepreneurial, would drive over 2 hours each week to come see us and stay very involved watching our sports, etc. And so, while it wasn't a traditional background, I had this really wonderful window into kind of two ways that people make life work. On one hand, this hardworking nurse who worked shift work and really struggled, frankly, financially for a big chunk of our upbringing for sure. And then I had an entrepreneurial father who worked equally hard, was very generous with his time and with his resources to make sure that many folks around him would all thrive. And so I think those two influences of working hard and being kind are real themes of what I carried into maybe more of my professional life. And so if my upbringing and my parents are reflected in kind of my value base, I'd say my first job, I mean my first real job after post grad. I had a traditional investment banking role out of undergrad, but where I spent 17 years was at Ontario Teachers Pension Plan here in Canada. In the private equity group, it was a direct investing team, which was novel at the time. Now is coined as the Canadian model, but at the time it was new. But it was kind of the best of both worlds. I knew that I was investing the pension money of over 300,000 teachers at the time, but I was doing it in an asset class that was new and exciting and coming up in the world, if you will, within the pension space. And so as a team of 10 managing billions of dollars doing direct deals, I was really kind of thrown into the deep end early on and just learned a ton. But being in that mission driven role really is a thematic, I would say, that really stuck with me. And spending 17 years in a very entrepreneurial environment that Ontario Teachers was back then really kind of set the tone for how I go to work, working hard and being kind, doing it in a mission driven way, but also feeling a very entrepreneurial spirit. And so if that's pillar two, I guess then the third pillar, having the opportunity to work at Redbird Capital, which was an extremely entrepreneurial private equity firm, really focused on sport media and entertainment at the time. Uh, Learning from entrepreneurs like Jerry Cardinal, who was the founder of that firm, really, further sparked that itch in me to be entrepreneurial myself. But try to find ways to keep a finger on the pulse of my mission driven values, if you will. And so the next leap for me was then taking an opportunity to run CalPERS as the chief investment officer, which again was very different, going from a hungry, work hard, play hard type environment of a Redbird Capital to then managing the largest pension in North America with 2 million constituents. The pension pays those that work hard for the state of California, which really resonated with me. And being able to be the chief investment officer of that platform was just a real intellectual challenge that I was super excited to take on at that point in my career. So that was fantastic. And then when I resigned from CalPERS, I really wanted to do something for myself, if you will, and for my family, which was to take a full year sabbatical. And that was probably one of the hardest things to do in my career, to tell yourself that you're taking a time out, to commit to yourself, to not hitch your wagon to any certain thing for a good year. And I really went into servant leader mode, which again is our friend Stephen Shaya will often use that phrase, but it really stuck with me as a framework to kind of spend my year, really just trying to be helpful without putting my hat out or my hands out, really just trying to, leverage any of the tools in my toolkit in a way that could be helpful to my network and give myself some real time to have a big think about what I wanted to do for my legacy chapter, if you will, for the next, 15 years of my career. And so that was an incredible journey for me. It ultimately, it took me all over the world. I spent a bunch of time in the Family Office Network, which is an area that I really enjoy, working with entrepreneurs and families on their strategy, on their investment strategy, et cetera. It allowed me to spend a bunch of time on initiatives that matter a ton to me, specifically around helping female founders get funded, whether that's entrepreneurs or fund managers themselves. And it also allowed me to lean into the women in sport arena. And again, I'd say to everyone, the advice is free, so you can take it for what it's worth. But let me try to be as helpful as I can while I'm having this year to be a servant leader. And so then that ultimately, Stephen, led me to what I will now do as my next legacy chapter, my final chapter from a career perspective. And I'll be launching my own senior lending fund with a group. I'm lifting a team out of a US bank, and we will announce in short order. But the exciting part for me about that is that I didn't have a traditional credit background, if you will. And in fact, the only real depth of credit that I would have seen would have been during my time at CalPERS, when we were given an allocation for the first time. We had to deploy a capital budget of, call it 50 billion over the course of a few years. And so it just allowed me to pick up another asset class in my toolkit. I traditionally run public and private equity. I spent some time with infrastructure and real estate, one of the Canadian pensions, but credit was just a new area for me. And so I spent a bunch of time during that sabbatical really leaning into and understanding some of the trends that I had seen wearing my CIO hat, and then had the opportunity to meet this incredible human, my new partner who we'll announce in the next couple of weeks, who really, again, if I go back to the first part of your question, similar values to me from a personal and professional perspective, similar aspirations to build a firm that is great to its people and great to, have a great impact on the world around us, and in a sector and an asset class that I think has tremendous runway, real white space right now, lending to companies that are not sponsor backed. So hopefully that gives you kind of a full range of where I came from and ultimately what's led me to what I'm about to do next.
Yeah, I mean, let's unpack this incredible journey you have. I mean, I can see now, I mean, you're a single mom, nurse. She's a nurse, so that means she's into care.
Correct.
So yeah. I can see that empathy and care sort of infuse your entire sort of journey. So I can now see the roots of that background. And she's hardworking, and she had challenges because she was a single mom and she's trying to provide for the best for your kids. But you would learn that hard work ethic aspect, right? And that caring, heartfelt aspect from her, and that's nursing as well.
Yes, for sure.
But then there's this thread of hard work and entrepreneurship and there's volatility in entrepreneurship, right? I mean, you have to be very agile, and you have to be able to kind of think outside the box and take on challenges that are not traditionally in place. That's the entrepreneurship side. but you
For
also work at Capital. So I could
sure.
so I
Yeah,
could see that thread from your father infusing your life. So I could see those two elements coming together, this confluence
sure.
of the best coming together. And then you work with the teacher's pension. And of
Hmm.
course, teachers are givers, right?
Yes,
So,
sure. Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah,
that's people going to teaching are givers. So, and then you're managing that pension fund. It's actually one of the top in the world as well, right? So it's a significant pension fund.
correct. Yeah.
Excuse me. And you spend a lot of time there and overseeing kind of new ways of managing and direct investing within that pension
Absolutely.
area. So
Yes.
opened up new ground, and there's that entrepreneurship side, and then you go into a private equity firm, and again, that's very entrepreneurial. You're directly working with capital. You're looking at companies that are showing high growth. So you're seeing this entrepreneurship sort of being catalyzed and scaling. And the sports, media, leisure, entertainment, I could see those aspects of it.
Hmm.
And then, of course, you go to CalPERS. So CalPERS is just really famous globally, right? It's like
Yeah.
a very significant firm. And you come in as chief investment officer, but you're also asked to, I believe, look at the social impact side or breaking new ground in that area. Uh,
Yeah.
was that correct? Like,
Yeah, I mean, CalPERS has been known for a very long time at being, true advocates for having an impact with its investment dollars, but at the same time, ensuring that its pensioners are receiving an appropriate risk-adjusted returns. And with the just the sheer amount of capital at work, it's hard to do. It's hard to move the needle. It's hard to move the ship. Everybody pays attention. It's always under the microscope. And so the complexity of trying to be mission driven, but producing appropriate risk adjusted returns is no easy feat and is one that you're constantly, like I said, under the microscope for. But the beauty of it is that the talent and the folks that find themselves attracted to, and in some cases, having worked for decades at a place like CalPERS, are just really wired to solve that problem, to work that problem and try to solve it. And so there was tremendous pickup, if you will, in my desire to make sure that before I left there, that we had demonstrated that we are making an impact, whether it was through the sustainable investing program that we launched, where we said we're going to put 100 billion to work by 2030 and make sure that we're not just talking about the dangers of climate, but that we're actually showing that we are going to be sustainable investors at the end of the day. A piece of that sustainable investing strategy was certainly around recognizing that diverse emerging managers also, diversity is important, and it's certainly not popular right now in the U.S. To speak of it. But at the core, there is tremendous amount of data that demonstrates that diversity is extremely important, and emerging managers have demonstrated that, they're hungry, they are resourceful, and they can return, very competitive. They can have very competitive returns. And so combining the diverse and emerging manager program was another initiative that the entire team from the board, starting with the board being very supportive of on down, was something I'm super proud of what the team was able to pull off during my time there.
yeah, I mean, that's a remarkable journey. I mean, Asset Management Corporation of Ontario, 70 billion pension asset management firm. You got this teacher's pension at 200 billion. You got the Red Bird Capital background. You got CalPERS, which is, I mean, it's just an incredible journey
Thank you.
of capital deployment and management and risk, as you said, risk adjusted. And I can't think of anybody else. It's just kind of background and then rooted in your childhood too, right? And how your upbringing. And then, gee, I can just see this percolating throughout your entire life. And then you take a year off and you take that time to really work pro bono to help
Yeah.
saying, hey, I come with all of this experience and relationships and let me hear what your challenges are, and I'll give you some of my wisdom or insight, and you can take it or you can.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that I mean that part was probably definitely one of the most rewarding from a career perspective. I'd say part of one of the many benefits I had during my time at Ontario Teachers, though, was the opportunity to move my kids and I too am a single mom. And so moving my kids and I to Hong Kong, where we lived for a couple of years and opened up that office for Ontario Teachers and really created a regional investment strategy. That was an incredible, that really, it really influenced my kind of global lens on problem solving and opportunities. And I think has been a really core part to not only to how I made up, but now even my children who are now both in university, it had a very lasting influence on them as well. Just to really, it's important that we have that global lens. And it's one of the things I noticed at CalPERS. And, this is a constructive observation, if you will. When you're an organization like many are in the US that really invests mostly through a US lens, you potentially really miss out on the real opportunities around the globe. And I could just see that so kind of black and white, if you will, sitting in a US pension plan, which is vast majority invested in US assets, whereas the Canadians, for example, the pension plans in Canada have always had more of a global lens. Well, not always, but at least for the last 20 years during my career, have had a very global lens. And just the benefits, again, of that diversification, it's just so important. And really, I think it's influenced the way that I invest, the way that I manage people, and my own kind of aspirations to have a real global lens in my career has been an important piece for sure of the puzzle.
Yeah, I mean the OTPP's presence in Asia, and you're building out their Pan-Asian investment platform based in Hong Kong. That would give you and that region, burgeoning region, right? I mean, it's a dominant region,
Yes.
and even geopolitically now. I mean, there's a lot of interesting things that are happening, and you spending time there would give you a perspective a lot of people don't have. So it's interesting, again, all of these different pieces, including the media, leisure, entertainment, sports side, and how you want to uplift women and also in sports and things like that. And then you take a year sabbatical where you're continuing to really be a catalyst for people to help them. But you're unbounded.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's a real luxury to not have those bounds on for sure. There's no question about it. And I took the opportunity while I was off to go back for a short period to visit the Middle East. I hadn't been to the Middle East since right before COVID hit. I'd been traveling to the Middle East since around 2010. So the difference between 2010 and when I was there a year ago now was just remarkable. It was just incredible to see the growth. And it felt like it did when I had just arrived in Asia, call it circa 2006 is when I first started going to China regularly. And then the kids and I didn't move out there until around the 2014 timeframe. But during that period of time from 06 to 14, again, Ontario Teachers being pretty early investors in Asia, it was incredible to see the growth and the energy and the excitement and the capital that was all coming into the region. Very similarly, you can certainly feel it. You were certainly feeling it back in 2020. And then we took a pause during COVID, but you can certainly feel that same energy and excitement in the Middle East right now. So that's an area that I'm, keeping a close eye on as well and making sure I continue to develop my relationships there.
Right. So, I guess that'd be Saudi Arabia and Dubai and Abu Dhabi. Abu Dhabi being a financial center, UAE,
Yes. Yes.
maybe Qatar as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think they're all so distinct and, in and of themselves, you really have to spend time in the region, just like in Asia, you really had to spend time understanding how different, but how exciting. We covered at Ontario Teachers, out of our Hong Kong office back then, we covered, everywhere from, India to Australia to, Southeast Asia to Northern Asia. And so it was a massive geography, and it was extremely different in every single one of those geographies. And so similar can be said, I would say, for, it feels like an obvious statement, but it's nuanced and important that you understand the nuances when you're creating partnerships or investing in these regions that are not North America or Europe.
And I because you brought your family with you, it'd be very it'd be a great sort of life experience for them as well.
Yeah, it was incredible. And now my daughter is in her third year of university at Trinity College in Hartford, and she's studying philosophy and Chinese. So she's kept her Mandarin up from when she was quite young, but was just fell in love with the culture and the language, and it has stuck with her, to this day. I'd say while my son hasn't kept up the language per se, has certainly grown up with a very global lens as well, and is studying economics at U Chicago. So it is definitely, as a mom, it's definitely apparent to me that the short period of time that we lived in Asia had a very lasting and important imprint on both my kids, which, just brings me so much joy to see that was such a positive experience for them at such a young age.
Yeah, and kind of this geodiversity helps, incentivize empathy for others and sort of understanding the other, right? And not so much,
100%.
this is my lens, North American lens, that's the world. The world is much bigger and there's nuances there, and to respect those nuances. So I can see all of these elements in you.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And then you decide to get into this whole credit area. So, okay, can you talk about so you saw a need, like you said, you saw a white space there, and you have all of this experience and wisdom, and you have relationships you can bring to this as well. What do you hope? What's your thesis? What do you hope to accomplish?
Yeah, so I'd say, when we talk about direct lending, and we certainly see, the largest names, some of the, the smartest groups on the planet have all very successfully raised, gajillion dollars, if you will, into core direct lending strategies. And those core strategies, volume is important. So those loans tend to be to sponsor-backed assets. So private equity-owned companies have a need for senior lending. Lots of groups have raised billions of dollars to lend to those very specific companies. 90% of the loans we see potentially are core direct lending. But 90% of the businesses in the US, for example, are not sponsor backed. They're not owned by private equity, and they still have senior lending needs. But it's more complex. It's not a volume business. If you're backing sponsor backed businesses, if you're lending to sponsor backed businesses, you can underwrite volumes and volumes of loans in a pretty short period of time, because a big chunk of the work has been done. In essence, you've got private equity groups that have had their eyeballs and expertise all over those businesses. You can take that information that's been cobbled together and underwrite those loans. But there's a whole world in the US specifically, because that's what we're targeting for the most part. There's a whole world that exists that they're not private equity backed. These are family-owned businesses. These are corporates in the US that do not have private equity backing. And so that means the underwriting itself is just harder. You just have to roll up your sleeves and do private equity-like underwriting. The stories are probably a little more complex. They don't come with a prepackaged deck, prepackaged, data room of information, because they're not sponsor-backed. And the banks have really not been lending to those businesses in the way that they have historically. And these groups, our friends who are raising these massive direct lending programs, don't really want the hassle of having to roll up their sleeves and do the private equity style of underwriting, because they've raised so much capital, they need to deploy that capital. And so there really is a white space of this non-sponsor backed or making loans to maybe under the radar, underfunded sponsors, if you will. There's a whole white space of that. And so, to be successful in that that does require a truly unique origination channel. And so you need to make sure that you have those relationships in the market with the lawyers, restructuring lawyers or accountants or bankers that are in that market of having clientele that are not sponsor backed. So that's a very important piece. You have to be willing to roll up your sleeves and do the work. You have to be willing to tackle these problems and provide solutions in almost a private equity style of underwriting, meaning it takes, weeks and months, not days and weeks, to underwrite those types of loans. And so, from my perspective, having seen the pensions in the US and Canada open up allocations to credit as an asset class was already super exciting. And I think those same groups are now seeing that core program isn't necessarily delivering enough juice, if you will, in the types of returns that they're getting. And so they're starting to be more open-minded to creating a slot for these more opportunistic credit strategies, which is what ours is. And so I'm really excited about that.
So a big portion of my audience are not in financial services. So when you say sponsor back, they may not understand what you mean. So can you explain what that means?
Sure. So what I mean by that is private equity firms are often called sponsors. So when I talk about sponsor-backed loans, it means a company that has already had a private equity group come in and provide the capital for the acquisition to acquire that business. And often those acquisitions, most often those acquisitions, especially for companies of the size that we're targeting, that have a lot of cash flow, they're not stressed or distressed. They're just more complex stories. So oftentimes loans are required for the cap structure for those acquisitions. And so a sponsor-backed company is simply referring to a company that has been bought by, is owned by a private equity group. And what that implies is private equity guys are super smart. They spend a great deal of time diligencing the cash flow profile of the businesses, the growth potential of the businesses, the stability of the businesses. And so when you're lending to a company that is sponsor backed, there's an understanding that a ton of work has been done. And as the underwriter for a loan into that business, you really benefit from that work that's already been done. That's very different than showing up to a company that's not sponsor backed or not already private equity owned, because they probably have not pulled together the financials in a tidy way or had the same amount of eyeballs on the business in the way that a private equity owned business would have. So it just means that lender has to do a bunch more work that looks and feels like the type of work a private equity firm would have done. So it just takes longer. It requires, a lot more of a solution, a problem-solving solution kind of focused mentality. And that isn't necessarily the type of work or the type of resources that a bank has today or wants to play in. And it's certainly not the type of opportunity that the large direct lending pools of capital that have been raised. They're not looking to do 3-4 months of work. They're looking to lend to businesses that have already been underwritten by private equity groups. So this white space of non-sponsor backed loans is a really interesting one, where you do have to have a unique origination channel to find those companies that need those loans. You have to have a unique underwriting skill set. You need to be able to underwrite with the same kind of investment acumen as what a private equity firm would be doing. And you need to have that, the patience to know that you're not going to be deploying into, 10 loans in a month. You're probably looking at 2 to 3 loans in a year, because it takes a long time to underwrite those businesses.
And then I can see your roots in entrepreneurship from your dad, and I could see the care and empathy from your mom. And I could see this in view, and then your journey, right? Because you were doing new kinds of deployment with the Ontario Pension Plan, right? And then also with CalPERS and Redbird. So I could see all of these pieces coming together, and then your year off as well. So that's interesting and challenging, but you like challenges. You like that entrepreneurship aspect.
I do. Yes, I do like challenges. I like being a problem solver. I like building things. And, again, I've been super fortunate for the firms that I've worked in, that are on one hand mission driven, but are also really in open-minded and having a growth mindset to building the businesses around them. Ontario Teachers, first and foremost, was such an entrepreneurial place to really cut my teeth and start my career at. So I'm super grateful for that. And CalPERS, while it's a beast, it's 500 billion. It has a very set asset allocation approach to deploying their capital. The board has been very supportive of being open-minded to look at, different parts of the risk reward chain. And so, as I said, when I arrived there, being able to launch a sustainable investing team and strategy, is proof that even the largest, perhaps perceived clunky organizations are actually full of people like me that want to be entrepreneurial and just want to do the right thing for their members.
Yeah, and then coming together to your dream job. This is now your dream job, right? Because
Yes.
you are the principal.
Yes. Yes, I am. I am. It's funny. I've never felt like I've had a job, though. I've always kind of been like, I can't believe they're paying me to do this. I've really had that type of feeling about my calling of what I've been doing kind of in the private market space from the beginning of my career. And so I wanted to make sure whatever I do for this legacy chapter of mine, if you will, legacy to my kids, that I didn't want it to ever feel like a job. I needed to make sure I found not only an opportunity that I thought was super exciting, and we just walked through why I thought that was important, but also to find, a partner or partners that are similarly wired to me. That value base is super important. That like-mindedness is super important, and having a vision for creating a great organization that people really want to come and work at was really important to me. And so part of the benefit of taking a full year off is I could really spend time getting to know people. And, as I was considering who or what it was that I wanted to do next, it was spending that time with these individuals that was just super important. And I'm so grateful for it, because I think oftentimes you leave a job and there's this pressure, there's this inside, like, oh my gosh, I need to find a job. And, there's a lot of really interesting things that one can jump at, but you don't often have the luxury of being able to take time to really get to know the people that you're going to be spending more time with than your own family in some cases. And so for me, that was just such a blessing to be able to spend that time and really get to know, in my case, my partner and the team that is, will be lifting out of the bank. Such great humans, so smart, so driven, but just so wired to be kind. And that was really important to me.
When you describe what you do, and then you're really partial to female founders and is kind of the underserved communities and making sure they get funding, that has a kind of a venture capital aspect to it, right?
Yes.
And have you ever done anything with YPO or the Young Presidents Organization, or are you a member of? I mean, of course, because they're so private, you may not want to disclose if you're part of some of these organizations, but.
Yeah, I didn't have, I did not join YPO when I was in that stage of my career. Again, being at the time myself, being a single mom, I was in Toronto and Hong Kong for the chunk of time that I'm referring to. And to be frank with you, when I met with the folks at YPO and the group, it was all males for the most part. And it just didn't resonate with me at the time as being something which I totally understood and respected, that you were really committing to showing up, contributing. And so I didn't want to take something on that wasn't resonating with me, knowing how much of a time commitment it would be. And I just didn't think it was going to be a great fit for me. Fast forward, though, ironically, during this time off, this past year, I have become a member of something called Fortaleza, which is really a spinoff in a way of how, and it was created by individuals who have been very long, very actively involved in YPO, but it's specifically for individuals that look to serve or help or are part of the family office community. And so that organization has been phenomenal because, there's 35 of us. At most we'll have 70 folks. Everyone has touches in some way a family office, whether they're a principal investing their own capital or advising a trusted advisor to some of the largest family offices in the world. It's this really close-knit group of CIOs and just great humans that are trying to be great, servant leaders for that very specific group. And it is a mix of geographies, backgrounds, men and women, and it's been so rewarding to be a part of that organization. So I imagine that that's what YPO would have served for me had I found the right fit at the time. And now I'm really benefiting from the concept of, committing the time, really putting yourself out there to be as helpful as you can to one another. And in turn, you're getting so much back. So it's just been a super rewarding group to be a part of.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not either part of YPO, but I've been supporting them because a gentleman named Pascal Gherkin, who was the international board chair, had this program called YPO 3.0, which is to kind of open them up somewhat. They asked me for help. One of the members asked me for help, so I've been helping them quite a bit. And they have an Impact Network Council, which is very much about sustainability and impact and purposeful leadership, innovation, and capital. And they're very thoughtful about making sure that there's more diversity and balance. So there's definitive programs in there now to try to bring more women into leadership, bring more women into membership, and particularly in the Impact Networks Council. And the only reason I can talk about it publicly is because I've interviewed the chairs and people within that community, and I chair their Impact Advisory Board. And,
excellent. Good for you.
Yeah, I founded and then chair it. So, and this is from 2019, and I continue to do that. But they're very, very much thoughtful of ensuring that there's this kind of equity aspect, and they have an Athena program to bring women into the membership of YPO.
Amazing.
Happy to do introductions if it ever is of interest to you.
Thank you. Yeah, no, listen, it is, no matter what I do for my so-called day job, I refuse to not continue to push really hard for women in asset management in general. And I think there are a ton of really wonderful organizations that are helping professionals come into the industry. And that's fantastic to see. I still think we are woefully underserved as women when it comes to getting funded. And there are so many pockets of incredible, very brilliant entrepreneurial women who are looking to launch their venture funds, are looking to start their businesses, and they just need the help of a stronger network. And part of it is on us as women. I think we fought so long to find a seat. We're actually not that helpful to one another yet. I'm hoping my daughter's generation, it is not that way, but I would say my generation, it still feels like I have to kindly remind the other sisters, like, we're in this together, so let's help one another. And so hopefully we'll start to see more of that, but it's such an area, like when you think about the numbers, like 3% of venture capital gets into the hands of women, like how is that even possible? And that's not a new, that's like even being generous with the numbers. If you look at, Black female founders, it's less than it's 1.5%. Like these are abysmal numbers and there's no reason for it. And so the reason for it is that we haven't historically had the same kind of network effect with one another in the way that our male allies do. And so it's important to me to continue to be on that journey. And I think the whole women in sports area, I mean, I love investing. I love investing in sports. I love sports. It's a natural area for me to stay close to, but seeing what's going on and the impact that for little girls to see, or grown women to see their likeness on the screen playing a sport, just has a massive impact on society that I think we really underestimate. And so making sure there's real healthy amounts of capital going in to support those leagues and those strategies, I think is super important.
I'm just thinking of maybe introductions I could do. I mean, I just came off 3 deployments and the only reason I could talk about it's gone public, it's with the Venture Capital Catalyst Initiative of the Canadian government. It's an
Right.
ICED, which is the innovation sort of ministry and economic development ministry of the government, working with the Business Development Bank, and they put together capital, and then they put together investment committees. The investment committees are quite small, just a few folks, and then we put out a public sort of invitation for people to apply, and then we go through a due diligence process. But part of that due diligence process is to ensure that it's balanced and that particularly women, underserved, Indigenous, Blacks,
Yeah.
people from different BIPOC populations come in, and that they get some kind of funding allocation as fund managers. So
That's
I've
amazing.
done,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
incredible to hear that is happening because there's such a need for it.
So I mean, I don't know if you have any spare cycles, but if there's any future capital deployments and you're willing to do some service in this way, happy to do the introductions. And it's probably one of the most rewarding things that I've done in my life. And you're backed by your team is really the Canadian government. They have
Yeah,
and
that's
then,
great.
yeah, and then
I hope the Canadian government continues to, be a supporter of these types of programs. I was in New York last week. The state of New York has an incredible diversity initiative that, the controller said publicly, they are going to hang on to that as best they can in spite of the pressure and the feedback. And I'd say the state of California has also traditionally been, although they can't call it diverse programs, they have been real advocates for making sure their systems internally are very, conscientious about how they invest and who they hire, et cetera. And so hopefully these programs continue, and it would be wonderful to see the Canadian government, and I even more importantly would love to see our Canadian pension system start to be leaders in this area, because frankly they just have not been, and it's disappointing that we've not, we're known for being so entrepreneurial and such innovators and so forth, and we've really been lackluster in the initiative of using the capital to support our own in Canada, as far as fund managers are concerned, let alone supporting diverse emerging managers. And so hopefully we'll see some change over time.
Well, interesting too, the capital deployments were really focused on ensuring that the underserved would get the deployment. So I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, that's
And
great. Great to hear. Good for you.
yeah, I mean, where there's future deployments, if you have any spare time, probably not, but happy to do introductions if you have any interest in serving in that way.
Yeah, please, let's definitely speak about that offline. I am trying to make sure that I can keep my finger on the pulse of and be as involved as I can be for, especially to be back in Canada. I'm really excited to be in Toronto. The business we're launching is predominantly doing loans in the US. But I will maintain an office. We'll have a presence here in Canada as well. And hopefully over time, I'll be able to be doing a lot more in Canada. I feel like the US has had me for quite some time, so I'd like to be able to contribute back to Canada.
Your new business is global though, right? You do
We're going to
credit
do North
globally.
America. 90% will be North American loans, maybe 10%. We're maintaining 10% for Western Europe. Our offices will be in LA, New York. And as I said, I'll have a small office here in Toronto as well. And so we'll see where we'll get started, and we'll see if we can start doing more in Canada, which would be amazing.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of people within my network that could benefit from your expertise. But Asia is not part of that equation, I guess, right?
Not just yet, not just yet. Um, again, I'm maintaining connectivity to Asia through my work in helping female founders get funded in globally. And so some of the initiatives, some of the advisory work that I do definitely has a global lens. But, as I'm launching my new fund, as I'm reminded by my LP, I want to make sure that I am very, very focused on
Marcus,
that.
right?
And yeah, I can't spread myself too thin. Sometimes I can't help myself, Stephen. I'm sure you know the feeling, but I see a need and I know I can be helpful and I want to jump on it. So I just, I'm a good multitasker though, and I'm good with time management. So hopefully I can continue to be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely know it both through YPO and female fund managers and things like that within YPO, but they're in Southeast Asia, right?
Yeah.
And they run these women programs for 10,000 women, things like that.
Yes.
There's a really key family group out of Southeast Asia, out of Thailand, and I could see them. They could use your. I mean, I could go on and on. I could think of a lot of people could use your expertise, but also in Europe and America and things like that. You know, I'm just amazed at what you're doing. I mean, it's
Thank you.
inspiring.
I appreciate it. I
Yeah.
really do. I really do appreciate it. I feel very fortunate to have had the career that I've had that's led me to a time in my career now where I can go and do this and launch something. And any raising a first time fund for anyone is not for the faint of heart. It's going to be challenging and tough and all of the above, but I'm really excited about it. I feel like it's a great time for me personally and professionally, and I also just think it's an awesome time to be launching this type of strategy. I think families, insurance companies love it. Pensions love it. And so hopefully, we'll take it one day at a time, but the team that we have is incredible. They are, world-class investors, and I'm just so excited, in the coming weeks for us to launch.
Yeah, in the Vicky program, the Venture Capital Catalyst Initiative, we've now deployed all of the allocation
Mhm.
over all of these different committees that I've served on. And the term emerging managers, the first three funds is considered emerging managers, right?
Yeah.
So, and the first one is really difficult. Probably the second one's easier, and then once you get to the third, it's more difficult again because you have to then have a track record. It
That's
has to
right.
work.
Exactly. 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 Yes. Yes. So we're going to take it one step at a time, but excited, really excited. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
that's
called, and
amazing.
we've called it Square Nine Capital, and people wonder, where does the name come from? So I say, the square of nine is three. So that's the representation of me and my two kids. And, a square has four sides, and my partner has two little ones and his wife. So it's kind of, we spent probably, more time than normal trying to come up with a great name that was meaningful to us, but also was catchy enough to launch a business around. And so Square Nine Capital coming soon. That's what we'll be launching.
Yeah, I mean, I'll try to help it any way I can in terms of
Yeah.
maybe I can do LP introductions as well.
Oh,
Um,
wonderful.
it's really, really interesting. Okay, so I'm a futurist. So I just came back from doing the largest private CEO conference, and I talk about the confluence of all of these technologies, and it's going to have represent a major inflection point for the entire world in the next 5 years.
Sure.
And that education, governments, organizations, everything's going to be changed.
Yeah.
Do you think about those aspects in the work you're doing?
Oh
And
my
do you
gosh.
have a
All
view?
the time. Yeah, all the time. I mean,
So what's your
the 2 and 20 model, start there. Like that's going to undergo tremendous pressure. And for those that are your listeners that are not in our industry, the 2 and 20 model refers to just how the entire private equity infrastructure, really like how that whole market considers itself getting paid. So 2% on the capital being managed and 20% of the profits going to the firm. different asset classes are a range of that, but 2 and 20 kind of refers to that structure. I think with the onset of the wealth management channel growth that we're going to see trillions of dollars coming online, and the creation of these semi-liquid products that actually give liquidity, that's, to be able to have access to investments that have been traditionally illiquid and now be able to have a bit of liquidity and also be able to pay less in fees. I think even though that model today is being set up for the wealth management channel, I think it's going to have massive implications on the entire 2 and 20 system. And so that can only be done with technology. And so I think we're going to see real shifts in because of technology in the wealth management channel's access to illiquids, but that's also going to have such an impact on how we've been modeling, or how we've been structured, if you will, in this industry for a very long time. And so figuring out that how to use technology to make sure that the wealth management channel is armed with the appropriate knowledge to safeguard them from bad actors, I think is going to be very, very important. I think from a regulatory perspective, there needs to be a lot of work done to ensure that the everyday person isn't completely fleeced, if you will, from bad actors. It's right now we're seeing the best of the best, the well-known household names creating these products, but very quickly, these products can be created, and you'd hate to just see, unsophisticated or those that are lacking sophistication really find themselves losing their life savings because they can access something that they don't really understand. So that to me is a really interesting thing that is on my radar for how, what's evolving. And I think I think we know AI has been around for a long time, but I just think the applications of AI in the wealth management or in the investment industry is going to be fascinating. We are all big users of ChatGPT, probably now on a daily basis. Like that wasn't even a thing 2 years ago. And so when you see how quickly we've adapted to some of these tools that are readily available, it's really interesting to see the impact it's going to have on the investments industry.
Yeah, I mean, you saw all the news about DeepSeek, but DeepSeek is actually the innovation arm of a hedge fund. And then the founder of the hedge fund, which is quite successful, decided, well, we've got this innovation part. Let's split this off into a separate company called DeepSeek. And then, of course, they launched all of these products and made them open source, and it upended the industry, right?
Totally. So, absolutely. Yeah.
So,
and it's a great product. I mean, I think we're going to just see more and more innovation like that for sure. And the applications, I mean, it's amazing if you can put together, the framework of a pitch in 3 minutes. I mean, it's a real thing. It happens. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and then there's a product called Deep Research, and that was just released. In fact, I keynoted about it, and I use it, but that's just the beginning. It's going to get much better, where the AI will actually do fairly decent research for you. And Google has one that's for researchers, but it's going to upend, I think, the financial services area. This is really our last question, and that is, looking forward, what's your ideal reality of where you want to be in, let's say, 5 or 10 years, and how will your vision be realized? Like, what would it look like? And then maybe there's 2 questions. There's that question, then the last question will be, what's your recommendations to the audience? And that'll take us to our hour time limit.
Okay. Well, I mean, my hope is that I hope that I can be an example of a female founder that gets funded, for example, so that I can continue to really, push the providers of capital around the globe to be more open-minded and put resources around figuring out how to bring those numbers of only 3% of capital going to women. And the only way to do that is by educating allocators, for example, on different approaches they need to use in order to diligence some of these underfunded minorities. They're not going to have traditional track records. They're not going to have had traditional jobs. They're not going to have the same kind of plain vanilla check the box background that the large allocators are used to. But if we don't crack this problem, if we don't come up with new approaches, then we're never going to be able to solve the problem. And so I'm hoping I can be an example. And by maintaining my commitment to being helpful to this community, I hope that it's a big, it's kind of chicken and egg, that I can be helpful so that 10 years from now, when my daughter is in the industry and potentially launching her own fund, we're not talking about this anymore, that you have to go to a certain pocket of capital because you're a diverse emerging manager. So that would be my hope, that we're going to see a real sea change. I think that the fact that more than half of the capital that's coming on in the wealth management channel is held by women, I think it's going to be a tremendous force of change that I'm super excited about. And so that's my hope. My hope is that in 10 years, there are many, 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 many women like myself who have been able to launch their own funds. And I guess my advice to the audience is, stay curious, work hard, be kind, and stay curious. It is really important to have a global lens. It makes us better decision makers. It makes us have more empathy. And I think we really, at a time like we're in right now, we need to have more of a global lens and real empathy for the world around us, for us all to kind of make it through the next decade, if you will, of change that we're seeing. And so working hard, being kind, and staying curious with a global lens would be my advice.
Well, that's really, really great, heartfelt advice. And thank you, Nicole, for coming in. You have a remarkable career and personal, professional life, and you're continuing to be very purposeful in leadership and innovation, capital, sustainable business, and impact, and a guiding light for all of us. So thank you again for coming in.
I really appreciate your time, Stephen. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for listening to The Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for The Brand Called You.